Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar, Unlocking Potential, the Role of Mental Wellbeing in School Success, with the wonderful Luke Rees. I know you'll be looking forward to hearing from him. Please submit any questions for Luke in the chat. And please remember that the webinar is being recorded and will be shared on social media later. So please be careful if you're talking about any pupils, not to say anything that might identify them. But before we go over to Luke, let's hear from Pete Collison, Compass Head of Sales.
Super lovely. Thank you, Anne. It's good to be here. I hope everyone can all hear me okay. Yeah, I just wanted to introduce a couple of things as, I guess, a bit of a precursor to what Luke's going to be expanding on and talking about a little bit more today. So a lot of what this webinar and a series of webinars, some we'll talk about more a little bit later on, have come off the back of some research that was commissioned by Compass earlier on this year, focusing on the issue of well-being in schools and specifically in schools in Wales. Although we think the findings probably carry a more broader relevance than that, of course. You know, Wales is not so wildly different in that sense. It's something that translates quite well. So a lot of what we're talking about in this webinar series comes off the back of that. So if anyone is not aware so far of the research that we did and where you can get at it, hopefully you can see it on screen. It's a report that's been published. There's a link there to get it. It's completely free. You just go along, download it. We don't need anything from you. We won't capture all your details or anything like that. You can just go along and grab it, and away you go. I hope you find it interesting and useful. I just really want to just pull out a few key points because I'm mindful a couple of you may not have read the report yet, and so probably good to give you a bit of a feel of fundamentally what it says. And you know, the results are genuinely quite revealing, although in some senses perhaps not surprising. They sort of probably back up what some of us already knew. But the vast majority of parents are worried about the mental health of their children in various ways. It manifests itself in lots of different ways. And very worryingly, a quarter of them say that their children battle with mental health on an almost daily basis, certainly frequent numbers of times every week, which is quite stark. Found that the parents feel that 2/3 of them feel that their children hide their feelings of mental health, which is also not a great thing. Not only do we think children are suffering from it, but they're actively sort of trying to suppress that. And in fact, actually, I listen to Radio 2 in the car on my way to work, and there's an advert on Radio 2 at the minute specifically about children hiding anxiety in their school bag is the premise of the advert. So, you know, I think that's something that's now universally sort of starting to be a little bit more understood. What children worry about does vary by age. So older children obviously worry about different things and potentially sort of display slightly more areas of concern around mental health. Peer pressure, social media, puberty, life changes at that sort of age of students in secondary all play a part. It's also slightly different for boys versus girls, actually. So Compass is doing a blog post on this coming up, but some of the challenges that faced female students in particular are quite troubling, and the extent to which female pupils, again, in particular, will go to sort of hide issues that they might be facing with their mental health is of particular concern. And the final point, I think we'll just touch on very briefly at the end of this webinar as well, is that a lot of parents would like to see their school communicate a bit more with them about how they feel the mental health of their students in school are going. So 4 out of 5 parents said that they would like their school to produce a mental health report card to go alongside all of the other communications that they get around academic performance and academic achievement. So that's something we'll touch on just very briefly at the end and some thoughts around that. But that was quite a clear message from the parent cohort that we interviewed. So those are just the highlights. There's a lot more in the report, so please do go and download it and have a read. I hope it's interesting, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of a premise, if you've not read it, as to some of the things that we're going to be tackling over this webinar series and some of the things that Luke will hopefully touch on when he gets into his session in just a second.
Thanks very much, Pete. It's a really interesting report, so I urge you to download it and have a good read. But let's go over to Luke, and can I encourage everyone to ask questions? It always makes for a better session, and just post them in the chat, and I'll ask Luke after he's finished his presentation. But over to you, Luke.
Thank you so much, Anne. First of all, yeah, I think the whole point of the research is fascinating reading, but I think it obviously for me it finally gives us research to understand what a lot of us see, and I'm hoping now that we can use the research as a real tool in terms of looking at the findings and actually bring it to life to make that change that we probably know that we need to see inside of education in schools because. As the title of the webinar does suggest, mental well-being does have a massive impact on school success, like it has done my own. I remember when I was in school. I wouldn't say many years ago now, but I'm feeling a lot older than I once was. But I remember probably about 10 years ago now when I was in school, in secondary school, and the impact that my mental health, my well-being had on my school success. Myself personally, in a very short-term story, I left school with only 4 GCSEs in the end. So I never was, in terms of my levels of school success as of such, I was quite a low achiever. And that was primarily due to my mental health and my mental well-being. I suffered massively with anxiety and depression when I was in school. So if I take you back to a time in around 2012, I was in in between year 9 and year 10 at the time, and I suffered massively with my mental health and my mental well-being. I never felt confident. I felt isolated, disconnected. I wasn't myself. I often describe myself as wearing a mask a lot of the time, especially in school. I'd wake up every single day and pretend I was fine when in reality I wasn't. I was suffering in silence. And I made an active choice every single day to put that mask on, to try and pretend I was somebody who I wasn't, to pretend that I was okay when in reality I wasn't. And as part of wearing that mask, I'd be this happy, smiler person. Teachers in school would see me as this happy child. My nickname was Smiler growing up in school, so everyone saw me with a big smile on my face, and everyone thought I was okay. But the reality was, when I came home from school that day and I'd sit at my desk in my bedroom, I'd take that mask off and I'd often break down in tears because I've always said that suffering in silence is tiring. But suffering in silence and pretending that you're okay, that's exhausting. And there's only so much of that you can do until eventually you often hit burnout point. And I think that's something that many of us face, not just students, but also people as teachers, teaching assistants, head teachers, no matter what your roles in the school. I think sometimes we all experience that burnout stage, especially when we try to help so many other students and so many other young people in our educational settings. Sometimes that does happen, and it happened to me. And it led to me a time where I was at breaking point. I couldn't keep on going the way I was. I didn't have the right support around me in school terms. That was often done for myself personally. I openly hold my hand up and say I never wanted to talk about my mental health. I never had the confidence to speak to people about it because I didn't think people would listen. I didn't think people would believe me. And admittedly, we've come a huge amount of way since I was back in school. The conversation now is a lot more talked about, which is amazing to see. But I still think we've got some way to go. And I think hopefully now this research will help us further instill the work that we need to complete to make sure that we're looking after the students' mental well-being whilst at school. But for me, my anxiety hindered my school success. And essentially what that led to is in 2012, unfortunately, me almost leading to almost take my own life because I'd hit rock bottom. I had no energy. I had no aspirations. I didn't know what I could do to help myself. And unfortunately, that led to me to being in an extremely dark place. And as part of that, as part of my journey to recovery from that, my darkest days, as I like to call it, when I look back and reflect on it, I never actually wanted to end my life. I just wanted to end the way that I was feeling. And for me, in that very moment, that was the only answer because I didn't have the tools, I didn't have the people around me, I didn't have the skills, the knowledge, the information of how to help myself and how to get the support that I needed from school and from my parents and from the people who worked in the school at that point in time. And the reason why that is, and I think a lot of teachers sometimes, especially within education, I think many of us sometimes don't understand the full complexity and understand the full scale of what young people are going through. And the way I like to describe my journey is a bit like an iceberg, essentially. And I think an iceberg analogy resonates with a lot of the young people that I work with now on a daily basis, but also a lot of the people that you're certainly going to see within your schools on a daily basis as well. And what I mean by an iceberg analogy is we often only get to see the very tip of the iceberg, which appears above the surface, which breaks above the water. And often what that is the actions, it's the behaviors, it's the decisions that people are making. So, for example, if I take you back to myself when I was in school, one thing that teachers used to think of me is, well, Luke's a misbehaved student. He doesn't want to get anywhere in life. He very rarely comes to school because he doesn't want to be here. Whenever I question or challenge him in a classroom, he always runs out of the classroom. Now, all of those things teachers were able to see. And all of those things teachers then put down to me and my actions of Luke doesn't want to be here, he doesn't care, and he's not a great student. And that's often what I got labelled as. But the reality is, when you actually looked beneath the surface, what was going on beneath the surface that teachers couldn't see and people in the school setting wasn't able to see visually through their eyes, was a build of emotions, was a person who had no confidence, a lack of self-esteem, who never believed in themselves, who was suffering with anxiety. My depression every single day when I came home was at rock bottom. And all of these things teachers wasn't able to see. But time and time again, I was judged by the small little actions, what people could see above the surface. Now, if I take you back to a real life example of what happened on one of my school days that I can remember vividly, is when I'm in a classroom, I always like to sit at the back of the classroom. However, a teacher always assumed that I wanted to sit at the back of the classroom because I wanted to misbehave, I wanted to go on my phone, and I wanted to talk to my friends. So whenever a teacher used to say to me, right, Luke, you're not sitting in the back of the classroom today, you're sitting right at the front where I can see you. For me personally, that's where my anxiety would hit a all-time high. Mainly because there was something about being sat at the very back of the class that meant that I've got nobody behind me, like I am sat today. I've got a wall behind me. I know there's nobody behind me looking at me. So that allowed me the best place to succeed in a classroom setting. I had no distractions. I had no one behind me to worry about. I could purely look forward and look ahead. Now, as soon as you put me to the front of the classroom, my anxiety would peak because I'd have a full classroom of people behind, 30 people behind me. Now, my curiosity would sometimes get the better of me, and I'd turn around. And I'd only turn around for reassurance to meet a need that I had that couldn't be met by looking forwards. I had to look around, make sure nobody was looking at me, and I could put my head back to the front and focus on the class. Immediately, though, when I turned my head, I was being distracting. I was trying to start a conversation because, yet again, that's what a teacher saw above the iceberg. Another one, personally, I'm a big fidgeter, especially when I'm sit down and listening to somebody speak. I'd often make little notes on my notepad or my school book or a little drawer. That was the best way for me to retain information. However, yet again, a teacher would see that and would instantly be, Luke's not paying attention, therefore he doesn't want to be here. So one thing that I need you to understand, and in terms of how we can look out, because probably as I'm telling you these things now, you're probably thinking of those students right now in your classrooms or in your educational settings, or you know what, perhaps I have one of those. Perhaps I've got a Luke in my classroom who likes to sit in the back because that's where they best concentrate, or perhaps they fidget a lot, perhaps play with their rings on their finger because that's what helps their anxiety levels and takes their mind off things. You've probably got those in your classroom right now. And my advice for you moving forward with those is we have to understand every young person's need. And when a young person comes into your classroom, every individual has a need that they have to have met to be successful, but most importantly, to be well, because that's what this is about. And how can they feel safest and how can they have the best education experience in your classroom? And I appreciate there's a lot of students in your rooms these days. I know class numbers are extremely high in many of the schools I work with across the UK. They're very high, but we want to make sure that we can meet the needs of those young people who need things. And a best bit of advice for supporting that, for me personally, is making sure that we can listen to the young people and what their needs are. I often tell young people, as you guys will be aware, work in the education system, you're not mind readers. And I think many young people are guilty of thinking that we are mind readers. We can read the minds of their needs. We can understand what they want. We can understand what they need without them telling us, or sometimes without them even opening their mouths. But I think what young people need from us as working in an educational setting is they need us to be good listeners. And I think listening is often a skill that we're not taught when we do our PGCEs, when we do our educational training. We often don't get taught the skill of listening. And I really do think that listening is such an incredible skill to have. But I think it's really important that we focus on the one aspect skill of listening that I think will have a fundamental difference on how you personally can help support students and their mental health and well-being. The really important part I want to focus on, I want you to listen carefully when I say this, is we need to be able to listen to hear rather than listening to be able to respond. And for me, that's exactly what I had from a teacher that helped me get the support that I needed. Now, a lot of this sometimes can be quite daunted. and we can sometimes be a bit scared when it comes to reaching the conversation about asking a young person how they are, but asking them are they struggling, about asking and starting the conversation around mental health and well-being. And some of us sometimes we hold back because sometimes we may be scared about what a young person may say to us. So some of us may think, well, if I don't ask the question, they're not going to tell me. And a lot of the times, young people just want to share how they're feeling. And when a young person wants to open up to you and wants to share with how they're doing in school and how you can support them best, if they're going to tell you something, I'll be honest with you, they're probably not after miracle advice. They're not looking for you to fix everything going on in their life. And I think sometimes we hold that pressure on ourselves. We think that we have to have all of the answers. We think that we have to be able to know everything, and we have to be able to respond to what a young person tells us with some motivational message, with some life-changing advice that's going to be that eureka moment where the light bulb's going to go above their head and be like, oh, yeah, you're right. My world's going to change now because of the one conversation I just had with you. The reality is, when it comes to supporting a young person's mental health and well-being, they often don't need all that stuff. What they need you to be is be an open pair of ears. And that's why it's so important for us to listen to hear rather than listen to respond, because those are two different types of skills and something I think we often get wrong. So many of us will listen to what a young person is telling us, and instantly we're already thinking, we're not giving them our full attention by listening to what they're saying. We're instantly thinking, right, what have I got to do here? Sometimes is this a safeguarding issue? Sometimes is this something I've got to report back? Do I need to refer this on? Do I need to tell somebody about this conversation? What can I advise them? These are the thoughts that's going on in our head when we're listening to a young person share how they're really feeling, when actually all they need to be is an open set of ears. I appreciate, and it's important that I do shed light that, of course, some things young people tell us will, of course, mean that we have to go through our own individual safeguarding policies. I'm completely aware of that. And depending on what's being shared and depending on your school policies and procedures, I expect you to take the appropriate action when a young person shares something. But a lot of time, the young people just want to be heard and they just want somebody to listen how they're feeling. And especially in my personal case, I relate to a very personal experience myself. My parents were divorced. So I often felt that when I was talking to my father or to my mother or another family friend, I felt like somebody was always listening from a different side of the view, a different point of view, we should say. And when I would tell them how I'm feeling, it would always be a blame culture. They'd blame it on somebody else, or they'd piggyback and blame it on the other person, and vice versa. And I never really felt that nobody listened to me impartially and just listened to what I had to be said. And if it wasn't for the teachers in my school that then listened to what I said, they wasn't giving any sides, they wasn't giving an opinion, they wasn't giving me some life-changing advice. The simple thing was, how are you doing today, Luke? Is there anything you want to talk about? How's your day been? Those simple questions that's not directly, how is your mental health? Are you struggling? Why are you behaving like this? It wasn't those forefronted questions that put fear into me. It was actually an opportunity for me just to be open and just to talk because the teacher listened. And if a young person is brave enough, because I think it is incredibly brave for a young person to be open and to share how they're feeling. If a young person is brave enough to do that, then I think the best thing that we can do is just tell them now. We hear them, we understand. And this isn't a point where we then share our personal experiences and we try and connect to them and say, oh, well, it could be worse off, or you could be this, or you could be that. It's a point for us to listen. I understand what you're going through. I hear you, because that's what a young person needs. Just that person who they can be an open set of ears and can listen to. And that's why, like I said, I'll say it for a third time, because I really need you to understand this. It is so important in terms of the role of mental well-being of school success. The biggest thing that will help a student is you being able to listen to hear and not focusing on listening to respond. Because when we get that right, for me personally, I think that's when a young person will often feel safer in school. They feel more connected. And sometimes they won't always come to you for answers all the time, and they won't always open up to you, and that's perfectly fine. But if we can eliminate the fear of people working in education, of starting the conversation, because we're just going to be the open set of ears and listening, we're going to be asking those open questions. Like I said, the questions of, how are you feeling today? Everything okay? Sometimes a check-in question like, do you have a good weekend? That can shed light for us to understand what's going on in that young person's life. it can shed light for, like it would have done with me, of understanding the iceberg analogy. It sheds light on what's going on beneath the surface, the things that you often don't get to see. Because although we spend a huge amount of time in young people's company in education, especially, for example, my school times was 8:30 to 3:30. Those are large chunks of the days. However, what we don't get to see is what happens before the school day. We often don't get to see what happens at the end of the school day. We don't get to see what happens at weekends, at half terms, especially during COVID, where we went from a time of not seeing any people forward facing for months. That we often don't get to see what goes on yet again beneath the surface, and that's something we need to fully understand, and that's something that I think will have a massive impact on us. But moving forward, the other thing that I think is fundamentally important for us in terms of looking after the young people's mental health and well-being in education is something that I know is talked a lot about, but it's something that I need to yet again cover because it's something that I feel so passionate about. But I appreciate that when you signed up to be a teacher, or when you had that why, that motivation, that burning desire in your belly, you thought, you know what, I want to be a teacher. I think many of us often have those role models or the inspirations, or what I like to call them the whys, the reasons why you become a teacher, the reason why you decided to work in education. We all have them. For me, it was a teacher. For me personally, that teacher was called Mr. Howells. I think we all have them. When we think of teachers and we think back of the impact they had on us, every single person has that one teacher who they were connected to, who helped them, who supported them, and who had a massive impact on their lives. And for me, it was Mr. Howells. And like I said, I personally don't remember many of the things Mr. Howells said to me, but what I can remember is how Mr. Howells made me feel. And I think that is something we need to focus on moving forward. Because like I said, it's not always about the life-changing advice people give to you. It's about how they make you feel in the company. And that feeling that Mr. Howells gave me was incredible. And I think all of us have that, likewise, in Mr. Howells, or a teacher or inspiration in your life that made you want to become a teacher. And when you sign up to become a teacher and you do your PGC, you do your training, you have your day job, and you have your list of job expectations and job description, I appreciate that on that list doesn't say many of the things that you have to do on a daily basis. It doesn't say being a support worker. It doesn't say managing a young person's well-being. It just says that the subject you're probably going to be employed to teach. And we have so many responsibilities inside of our jobs these days to look after young people, to look after their mental health, their well-being, as well as their educational success. But I want to give you one everyday reminder before I finish up and I allow the opportunity to have some questions. And that is the most important fact. There's something that I want you to remember, is that your work changes lives. Because if it wasn't for Mr. Howells in my school, I honestly wouldn't be here right now. And the fact is, your job has a fundamental impact and it changes young people's lives. And without you in your roles, without you in your jobs, so many young people wouldn't have achieved what they have in their life. So many of them wouldn't have gone on to live the lives and the careers that they would have because of your roles. And it's because of your roles, young people allow themselves to have the best future for themselves because of the work that you do, because of how you make them feel, because of the support that you give. But what's fundamentally important, in order to give them that heads up, to give them that chance, what I need you to do is I need you to promise me that you make sure you make it a priority to look after your mental health and your mental well-being just as much as we're looking after the students. Because, I always talk about the plane analogy. The fact is that as soon as you're on a plane, the first message they give you, put the mask on yourself first before others. And I know sometimes in education, it can sometimes feel like we're putting masks on so many other people's and so many other young people before we put the mask on ourselves. But we sometimes think that putting the mask on ourselves first is a selfish act, when in reality it's a necessary thing to do. Because by taking that little bit of extra time to look after yourself, to have that self-care, to do the thing that you need for yourself, to put that mask on yourself first, it's going to give you the opportunity then to go around and help put the mask and help so many other young people. So that's why we have to start the conversation of looking after young people's mental health and well-being by looking after ourselves, by taking the priority, by doing the things that makes you happy and the little things that you can do to look after your mental health and well-being. And these doesn't have to be big things. They don't have to be, the meditation or, spending hours of self-care and investment, all these things. It's often the little things that you do that make you happy. For me, I know it's walking my little dog, Maggie May. I know it's a very offending name, but a little Frenchie Maggie May. Walking my dog for half an hour just allows me to have the time that I need. The little things. The first cup of coffee in the morning is always another good one for me. I know many teachers will often rely on that first cup of coffee as well to get going. Doing the little things that allow you to bring your best self to work. Because if we don't do that, yes, we're going to suffer, but also fundamentally, the young people will suffer too. So that's why it's so important to look after your own mental well-being just as much as the students. Because although we talk about unlocking potential of students, we also have to make sure that we're unlocking the potential of you as being an educator as well. And that starts with yourself. So that's why please look after yourselves. Please be kind to yourselves, because by doing that, by doing the small things, we are all just simply one decision away from a totally different life. And that's for ourselves as educators, but it's also incredibly true about our young people as well. And for me, the most important thing we have for that is that potential, because we know young people can achieve amazing things when given the opportunity. We want to make sure that we can look after their mental well-being to give them the tools to set themselves up for future success as well. But yeah, thank you all so much for listening, and thank you also for the amazing work that you do. I think not enough people thank you for the incredible sacrifices and things that you give up to change and save lives, as I say. So thank you for the amazing work that you do, and I'm more than happy to take any questions that any of you may have.
Thanks very much, Luke. That was very inspiring. I love your analogy about putting the mask on yourself first. But that's one of the hardest things to actually do as a teacher, because you're always going to be looking to help others. And somebody needs to give permission. I mean, you're giving permission, but I guess it's also something that needs to come from the senior leadership in the school. They have to tell teachers, yes, you need to do this. I mean, do you speak to the senior leaders and say, can you do that? Can you tell your teachers to look after themselves?
Yeah, definitely. I'll actually tell about an interesting story that I had with one school conference. I was speaking at a staff training day back in September of last year. I won't say the school name, but I remember going to the school day, and it was all around mental well-being of educators. And I remember all the heads and all the senior leaders put all their staff in this keynote for myself. But all of the senior leaders then went off to do another event, or went off to do something behind the scenes. And I remember they said, "All right, Luke, we'll set you in. We'll see you in an hour." I'm like, "Oh, where are you going?" And they said, "Oh, we're gonna go and do something else." I said, "Well, no, sorry, but this is important, just as important that every person in the room that was there for it." And I had to put a bit of a standpoint on it, the importance of, look, everyone should be in here. And gladly went really well. But we ended up inviting people such as all the senior leaders, all the head teachers. There was people in the school, for example, at the janitors. I think that's very American way of saying it. But all the caretakers, as we say in Wales, all those people, I said, need to be in this room, because this is just as important conversation for them as teachers. So yeah, it's really important to have those conversations with senior leaders in schools, and it's a conversation that I'm extremely passionate about, because we need to invest in it. And it's really important sometimes to just giving that teacher the half an hour that they need to switch off, to be themselves, to look after their own mental well-being. That small amount of time could add up to a huge amount of difference in terms of educational success.
Yeah, I think definitely. And one thing that struck me was that you said your nickname was Smiler, and
Yeah.
Everyone thought you're okay because you were smiling. Now, we hear often about the very quiet children, and how do you know when they're anxious? But that's even worse when you've got somebody who outwardly is really happy. How on earth does a teacher sort of get to grips with that? How do they know what's going on beneath the surface? What have you got any strategies to help with that?
Yeah, definitely. Because, like, obviously, from our eyes, we look at them and we see someone that's happy. It's often very easy for us as teachers to, if somebody's kind of got the chin on the chest and the shoulders down and they're walking around like this and being very quiet and timid, we can physically see that they're not quite right. But when someone's walking around quite proud, their shoulders down and smiling, we think, right, they're okay. Let's not focus our energy on those. Let's focus on other people. So it is difficult. And that's where I think a lot of young people sometimes think that we as teachers are mind readers because they expect us to know these things, when unless they shine a light on things, we don't. But in terms of tips that we can do to support them, I think it's investing time to ask these questions and listening to young people, regardless of the circumstance of what they present in. Like I said, the checking question, how's your weekend been? And just seeing how they answer to that and respond to it. Because they may respond with a smile on their face, oh my God, I had the best weekend ever. But they may also turn around and say, well, you know what, sir or miss, didn't quite have the best weekend, home was a bit rough, and we can gain a lot of perspective from that. So sometimes it's just having the conversation, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that mental health question that we ask and checking in, and how are you feeling, how are you doing. It can simply just be that two-way conversation that you have and making time for it. So asking those more open and broad questions, I think, is a really good point, a really good place to start. But also, one of my other top tips, I saw this done in the classroom from one of the schools I spoke at, and I found it fascinating. There was ways of teachers want to know how they check in, and one of the things that teachers have done is writing things on a sticky note. For example, at the end of one registration, it was like, right, okay, on a piece of paper, write down how you're feeling, or maybe drawing an emoji of how you're describing how you're feeling, and just put your name on it. And the young people would fold this sticky note up and would pop it in their box as they went out of the classroom. And what a teacher then would often do, then what I witnessed was where they open up the box, they look at the sticky notes, and just to see how young people are feeling. And what I witnessed from visually, because I was sat in the classroom waiting to deliver a session after the form group, was a teacher just saying, well, this just gives me a chance to see how students are. And one young person put on there, I'm struggling today, and they knew what their name was because they put their name on it. And that teacher then knew that they can then go and look out for it and look out for their well-being. I did a very similar thing at home personally. We called it a traffic light system, and it was a way of me checking in. And it was a way of students can check in as well. So if a young person says, for example, green, they know they're okay. If a young person touches, for example, amber, it might be as a traffic light system. They may be, look, I'm doing okay, but I'm not the best. And if they touch red, then they know, right, okay, you know what? Keep an eye on me. I'm not doing too good today. Just be mindful. And then we know as a teacher, we can follow up on the reds and the ambers to check in on how they're feeling. So lots of visual things. And the reason why I try and use visual things and physical things is because young people, especially if they present like myself, being smiler, being really happy, can sometimes find it really hard to find words to describe the way that they're feeling. And that's a really hard task to do. So just by doing physical drop reminders, whether that be writing or touching something or drawing something, can be really good visual tools that can help you engage all of the student despite what they present.
I've been in schools where I've seen the sort of traffic light system in operation. Children have had cards on their desks, and where they'll have the red, amber, or green, and it's sort of face up on the desk. And I sort of had mixed feelings about that, because I'm not sure how honest the children can be, because everybody sees that.
Yeah. I think it depends on how you do it. So for me, the traffic light system worked really well at home because it allowed my parents to know how I was feeling that day. And it was a way of me being open and honest with them. Also, vice versa, my parents used to do it as well. So I used to get to see that actually my parents weren't at 100% every single day of the week, which is what I thought they was. So we did that, the traffic light system, more at home than at school. But I have seen it done at school, and one school did it really creatively. Actually, they give every student a ping pong ball, and on the first day of school, they coloured in their own ping pong ball, and so we knew exactly what it was and whose was whose. And it was right, just drop it in as you go out. So students didn't get to see who was putting what in where. It just allowed them to see where they was that day, for example. So there are some really fun and creative ways you can do with it to make it visually engaging. But I do.
Nice. I like the ping pong.
Yeah, I do appreciate, though, Anne, that some young people, and it's, for example, if you ask somebody in front of a group, likely to hide away and share in. I had one young person once, for example, who refused to get the support that they needed in terms of having, for example, school-based counselling, because, and this is very similar to my experience, was I was too scared to have school-based counselling because I didn't want to be labelled as going up to knock on the door that said in big white piece of paper, school counselling. Because I remember coming out of the room after one of my first sessions, and my friends walked past and said, "What are you doing in there, Luke? Why are you going to speak to the school counsellor?" And I froze. I didn't know what to say because all my friends saw me come out of this room that had a big white piece of paper and it said school-based counselling. And if these little things can have an impact on young people's mental health and well-being, it's just being clever with actually how we can make sure that people see that as a strength as opposed to seeing it as a weakness.
Yeah, absolutely true. Thank you. Anybody out there has any questions, please put them in the chat so I can put them to Luke. Otherwise, I'm just going to continue talking to you because you're really interesting. So I've got lots of questions for you.
Could I ask a question, Anne, if you don't
Of course
mind?
you
Can
can. Yes,
follow on
please
from this?
do.
Thank you. Sorry to interject. If our attendees have them, then please do put them in chat, as Anne said. Luke, I was really interested in something you said right at the start of your talk there, and Anne alluded to a little bit, and it's also backed up in our research as well. And it surprised me, and it's the extent to which students and pupils and young people will go to hide their mental health. And you talked about it a lot. You talked quite a lot about having to wear that mask every day and how exhausting it is. What was it that made you feel you had to do that? I mean, you're a young person at that age. You were obviously very aware of your mental health, and perhaps you were very aware of how it was perceived by others. What made you feel as though you had to put that mask on to that extent?
Yeah, definitely, and also the mask is something that do physically, but also the other side that I used to do in a school setting that teachers never picked up on essentially was I used to spend a lot of time in the toilets, believe it or not. Toilets for me was a safe space in which I could put myself in a cubicle and I was on my own. So for me, I'd go to the toilet a lot during school. A lot of teachers thought I just had a bad stomach or something, but reality it was me hiding away from my emotions. So yeah, again, physical things that we can see students do that I used to do to hide away from my feelings in terms of wearing that mask essentially. Now, I think what made me feel that way is, if I'm being honest, was probably stereotypical. If I'm going to be completely transparent, especially being a man, being people who see me, I look a lot different when I'm sat down. But I'm quite a big guy, a 6'3" rugby player, stereotypically. So I felt as if that I had to fit into that character. I felt that I had to be that person that people saw me as. And it was a big, and especially growing up in a South Wales in a rugby-based culture, that it was, you need to be big and strong and you need to be able to get through it. And I think sometimes we think that I always thought and viewed that looking and reaching out and getting help was a sign of weakness, when in reality it's a sign of true strength. But people never shared that. People never talked about it. So I felt as if I had to portray that character. I had to be big. I had to be strong. I had to be confident. And I think sometimes us as teachers, we also wear that mask too, because we feel as if that we have to leave life behind. When we come to work, we have to be strong for our students. We have to be confident for them. We have to have a smile on our face. We have to give the hope to our students, although sometimes we may not feel it as teachers. But also talking as real life as parents as well. I never saw emotions from any of my parents, so I felt as if that, well, if they don't see emotions, then I have to portray that too. So for example, if you didn't see kind of my father cry, then I had to portray that character as well, because I then saw that men don't cry, so I shouldn't cry as a child. And also, for example, if we think back, I know this is going very deeply in terms of deeply rooted, but for example, if we think of a child, when a child falls over, the often first advice that we always give to them is, don't cry, it's okay. Because we tell people, yet again, emotionally, if you're hurting, don't cry, it's okay, brush it off, get back on your 2 feet, let's get moving as quick as we can. When actually, it's okay to cry, it's okay to feel emotions, it's okay to process the feelings that we're having. But I always felt that because I had this character that I had to portray that. And I felt that if I didn't portray it, then I would be seen in a different light. And I didn't want anything to accept that. And a way of visually thinking of it is I was kind of holding on to that last branch of opportunity in school. But everyone above me and everyone around me was always willing to put their helping hand. All the teachers wanted to help me, but my pride was in my other hand, weighing me down. And I didn't want to let go of that pride that I created for myself to actually reach out and get the help that I needed. So that's what I think kind of, majorly affected me in school.
Thank you. We've got a question in from a member of the audience, saying, how can we better integrate mental health education into our curriculum to support our students' well-being?
Oh, great question. For me personally, to be honest, I could probably spend the next hour on the whole webinar talking about things I think we could do better to integrate mental health into our curriculum to support students.
I would just keep it short. Keep it short.
For me personally, yet again, I go back to it and I think it's really the small things. And I think it's the little things that we can do on a daily basis that will have a fundamental difference. And I mean by the small things, it's the little things that we often sometimes take for granted for. Because in terms of when we look at embedding into the curriculum, I think that's a big task. And I think that takes a long time and a lot of actions, a lot of big things. When if we can actually break things down to small, actionable targets, the smaller things that we can do on a more regular basis, the more we can form better habits, and actually the more success we'll have over a longer period of time. So when it comes to in terms of looking at us in terms of where we are now and where we want to be, essentially, I think the small little things on a daily basis as habitual practice that we can do, the better off we will be. So in terms of actually what can we do to make these things better in terms of the small little things, I think it's providing spaces for young people to talk, for young people to have questions. From a young person's perspective, from a student perspective, it's like I said, providing opportunities to speak in different settings, but also realizing that some young people won't, because when I talk about spaces, I remember one school I was at in terms of delivering some speaking services to, they had a wellbeing room, which was fantastic and was great. And honestly, it was fantastic, I have to be honest. And like, oh, all of our young people come here. And I was like, okay, what about for the young people who don't feel comfortable coming here? What other services do you have? And they thought that just having one wellbeing space ticked all the boxes that they need for young people to speak. When in reality, what we need to have is a diverse range of places that people can go to. So, for example, that might just simply be a kickabout in a yard. Something about, especially coming on Mental Health Awareness Week last week with the theme being movement, allowing some young people to go and kick a ball in the yard and having a conversation. So sitting down one-to-one in a classroom isn't always the best option for a young person. I know some teachers had the best response by simply going for a walk around the school during a break time or during a lunchtime to have that conversation whilst talking. So I think little things like that can have a massive importance. But in terms of curriculum basis, I do really think that young people and every young person should be entitled to learning wellbeing skills, because every young person is going to suffer at some point during their life, and that's not suffering with mental health, but is also going to have a role of managing their well-being. And at some point they're going to have some news, or they're going to go through an experience, or they're going to go through something that's going to bring them a feeling or an emotion, whether that be a breakup, a family member passing at home, something along those lines, and they need to have the skills to be able to cope with their well-being. One thing that really frustrated me, actually, being honest with you, was during COVID, you had a lot of teachers telling young people that they needed to be resilient. But then when you question the schools and say, well, where are you teaching them resilience? Can you tell me what lesson they have that's going to teach them the skills of how to be resilient? They never had those skills. They never had those lessons taught. So it's not fair that we expect young people to learn these soft skills at home. Young people need to be taught during education how to cope with their mental well-being, how to cope with their emotions, how to look after themselves, because if they don't learn these skills themselves, they're probably not going to learn it unless they go and do the self-discovery and learn it from elsewhere. So I really do think the young people should be taught these skills inside of a curriculum, personally, as my personal experience.
Okay, thank you. That seems like a nice thing to end on. Unless you have one final short sort of tip to teachers or something you want to say?
I'll build on it slightly in my last answer, but just the importance of, I think, as teachers, but also as young people, we need to make sure we have a toolkit, as I like to call it. And the reason being behind that is because you're not going to have that one tool that helps everything. And I think the best thing we can do for our students, and the best thing we can do for ourselves as teachers, is creating that toolkit of self-care tools and things we can do to help us on a daily basis. If we expected a carpenter, for example, to turn up to complete a job, they're not just going to turn up with one screwdriver, because one tool doesn't fix everything. They have a range of different tools, and I think the better off we can create our well-being toolkit, as I like to call it, the better off we'll be able to look after ourselves, and the better off we'll be able to help look after the young people and the people that we have around us. So go and create your wellbeing toolkit.
That's a very good point to end on. Lots of tools for all different things that might happen. Brilliant. Thank you. I really enjoyed that. And over to you, Pete, for your final thoughts. Oh,
You're
I was muted. There we go. You've got me on record saying I was on mute. Lovely. Yeah, thank you. I've just got two quick things to finish on, if that's okay. And the first sort of actually builds on what Luke was saying there. It's about a toolkit, right? Like, it's not one size fits all. So I just wanted to, I guess, fly a flag for Compass at this stage. Obviously, we've sponsored this research, and we're spending a lot of time at the moment talking to schools that work with Compass, but also schools that don't, about the well-being of their young people, of their pupils, and also of their staff, and what we can do to help. You know, we work with schools, we provide software, we provide tools. So I'm not going to read out this slide because it's on record and you can read it for yourselves. But I think what's really struck us actually is the role in collecting intelligence, collecting data, and making that available to help teachers in any context better understand those young people that are in front of them, because it's not one size fits all. And you get people, and I hope Luke won't mind me using his analogy, you get people that are the smilers, that actually underneath it's a mask, and underneath they're not smiling. And you have the children that perhaps aren't externally smiling, but they're okay. They're perfectly fine. That's just their character. And unpicking that is profoundly difficult, and certainly Anne touched on in her questions. So, you know, if that's an area that you're interested in, if it's an area you want to explore more, anyone on this call or anyone watching the recording, we'd love to chat to you about it, whether you want to work with Compass or not. You know, we'd love to talk to you, because it's an area that we're growing our understanding, and we're finding lots that we can do to build up data and a view of pupils and young people. So do get in touch with us on that. You will get a follow-up to this webinar with our contact details on it. So do reach out if you want to chat to us more about your school and perhaps the things that you're looking at. The final thing that I wanted to say, just before I hand back to Anne to close, is I just want to fly the flag for our next webinar. So I mentioned this is a webinar series. This is webinar 2 of our series of 4. The next one is coming up in about 4 weeks' time, and actually it again touches on something that Luke mentioned earlier. You know, big burly rugby players, they struggle too, right? Like this stereotype of being that, it's difficult. So we're really pleased to welcome Rhys Thomas to our next webinar, who is, as some of you will know, an ex-Wales professional rugby player. And he'll be talking about lessons from a sporting life, obviously career as a professional athlete and rugby player, and how, again, we talked about resilience. Like, resilience is a taught skill. It's not naturally found. So it'd be really interesting to hear Rhys's reflections on that and how that's played out in his life. So if you're interested in that, 4 weeks' time, it's again free, completely free to register. You will get sent a link. There'll be stuff on our socials as well. So it'd be lovely to see people on that, if that's of interest to you.
thanks very much, Pete.
And I think that's me. Back to you, Anne.
Thank you. And thanks, Luke, for a really honest and inspiring presentation. It was pretty moving in parts. Just a reminder that you can go and download a free copy of the Mental Health in Wales report from the Compass website. But thank you all for joining us, and have a great evening. Bye.
Thank you.